Okay, good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. It's about 1 minute after 8 and about ready to go here. This week, I'm going to talk about a couple of things here. I'm going to use a kind of a little guide that hopefully complements some of the things that you've been looking at already. So I'll start with a little bit of kind of announcements, that sort of thing. So hopefully you've been getting into the essays this week, and you've also been, I hope that that helps those brief summaries of some of the more difficult articles. I think the uh, E.O. Wilson article, the Stephen Jay Gould article, and the Wendell Berry article. So hopefully those brief summaries have helped. And what I'm going to do after this is I'll post the video, but I'll also post the document here. And this week, what I'll do is if you have questions or comments at the end of my presentation, that's great. And if not, don't worry about it. So you'll get credit just for attending this evening. So I hope that's okay. And we'll just get right into it. So, so this week we're looking at this issue of the person as a discoverer, in a sense of what role does science play kind of in a person's overall life. And so to that end, you start thinking about, well, science is really kind of a dominant thing. It's become very dominant in the last couple of 100 years. And so we sometimes talk about the scientific method. And I'm not sure that we should say the one method, because there are a number of different methods depending on the science. And because of that, you see that the sciences often get separated and fragmented. And so that's one of the truly valuable things, I think, that not that Wendell Berry, E.O. Wilson is trying to do in Consilience. He's trying to bring things together in an overall view of life. The big mistake he makes is thinking that biology can account for it. And he ends up, what I would say is practicing philosophy without a license. And because of that, he gets into some serious trouble. And what I'm going to do here then is I'm going to share my screen with you, if I can find the right document. Here it is. And we'll kind of walk through this here, and we'll get started. So let me see the, let's see how this looks. Let me stop that for a second and start it again. So let me see if I can find the document. There it is. Okay. And we'll go there with that. Okay. I think I've got it figured out. Okay. There, hopefully you can all see that now. And if you can't, give me a thumbs down or something along those lines. So hopefully you can all see it at this point. And okay, so if anyone wants to unmute themselves and say, yes, we can see it, that would be great. And I'd appreciate that. So yes, anyone?
I can see it.
Okay, thank you. I was just about to say Bueller, for any of you who know old movies. So we'll start with this.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so let's get going here. So let's start with this idea of paradigms in science. This is a term, this word paradigm came from a philosopher of science named Thomas Kuhn. And basically what a paradigm is a model. In fact, it's a very large model. It's a model that tries to explain basically everything within a science. So there have been many different kinds of paradigms for explaining things. So if you look at, for example, the four elements during the ancient times. So there was earth, I always remember this as earth, wind, and fire because of the group, but it's earth, air, fire, and water. So there were these four elements, and there's actually a fifth element that they called the ether, but it was a celestial element, which meant it was in the heavens, but these were four terrestrial elements. And so they would look at things like a human body, for example, or the dead mouse that I just found recently. And so you've got the earth that the mouse is made of. You've got air, if it was breathing, but it wasn't, fire, and it was starting to get cold, so it had less of that, and then blood, which is water. And so this is why people would do things like put leeches on you to, you had too much, water, or they'd call these the humors, actually. So this was called science. Um, and this is, for a while, some of it actually worked. So if you look at the heavens, you could come up with a theory of the earth that, everything's moving around the earth, because quite frankly, it does not feel as if the earth that we're on right now moves, right? In fact, it looks like everything to the opposite. It looks like the sun comes up over there and it rises over the sky, and the same thing with the moon, and you can follow the stars. And we don't feel like we're moving unless there's an earthquake, right? So that was science. And so they would come up with a model, and that model was called the Ptolemaic model, or the geocentric, geo for Earth, all right? And it worked because they could figure things out. They could figure out when for example, an eclipse was coming, and certain kinds of things, and they could figure out the seasons. So that was actually science. It wasn't great science, but it's kind of worked for them. So so like when you drop things, that's gravity. They didn't call it gravity, but they didn't have the theory that Newton had, all right? So and the fixity of species, so that species don't seem to change. I mean, you can, with your dogs and cats, you can kind of make things change, but human beings really don't change much. And so there is Aristotle's theory of the fixity of species. So Aristotle was kind of seen as the scientist for many years, but these things break down. Uh, and and I'm going to get to that theory is not just a theory in a little bit, but so these things break down because they can't account for certain kinds of anomalies or irregularities. So think, for example, of a cardboard box. The cardboard box, it holds lots of different things. So it can hold papers, it can hold pens. You can put books in your cardboard box and other kinds of things, and it works for that. But if you start pouring water in it, the cardboard is going to disintegrate, and it's no longer going to work. And that's the way you can kind of think of a paradigm. It was like a cardboard box, and then you get a different one that will take care of the problem of the water. So you can waterproof a new box, okay, until something comes along there that kind of unravels it. So this is kind of what a paradigm is like. It's like taking all the stuff that putting it in a box and working within that box until the box kind of falls apart. Okay, that's kind of how a theory works. Now, a theory is never just a theory, because the theory often works. It can explain things. And when it doesn't work, that's when you have time for change. So gravity is never just a theory. So you're not going to step out of your second story window and say, look, gravity is just a theory. No, because it's more than a theory. It's an explanation for why you'll fall to the ground and break multiple bones, right? Same is true of evolution. Evolution is not just a theory. It works because it explains pretty much everything in science, in biological science. In fact, that's what explains how you come up with a flu vaccine, okay? Is because the flu mutates. And so we can see evolution in real time when we look at things like that. Now, this is where you get into Popper's work. And Popper talks about falsification. And with falsification, that's part of what contributes to how a theory breaks down. So if you can prove it to be false, that works. And this is actually what Galileo does when he shows that the Earth is not the center. He shows that the Earth is actually orbiting the Earth. Well, actually, what he does is he falsifies this idea that everything orbits the sun. And so he demonstrates that, or everything orbits the Earth. He shows that Venus actually goes through phases like the moon does. And he also shows that there are moons to Jupiter. And so the telescope, and he did not invent the telescope, but he perfected it. So he uses the telescope to use for his experiments. And so he basically falsifies the old theory. And so there are some things that aren't falsifiable. And that's part of what you're doing with with the Karl Popper essay, he's saying, look, um, astrology is in principle not falsifiable, therefore it's not a science. Now, it might be interesting, it might be amusing, but it's not science. It's not going to predict anything, okay? It's not going to help you, all right? So that's kind of how science works. Now, I also asked you a question this week on the limits of science. And and one of the questions was, does science ever overstep itself? And we might be more precise if we say it's not so much that science oversteps itself, but scientists do, okay? And I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. The first is of Hitler's Germany. There's a doctor named Joseph Mengele, and he performed some of the most horrific experiments experiments on other human beings ever. So he would torture them, he would give them various kinds of diseases and how they would respond. And he treated human beings as you would treat, as people treat lab rats, okay? Because he wanted to see what would happen. And most of us are horrified by that, and rightly so, because it violates the dignity of human beings. Okay, and so the Jesuit tradition, the Ignatian tradition of care for persons, this is the exact opposite of that. So we can all be horrified by the Nazi war crimes against humanity, but it also happened in the United States at exactly the same time. And in Tuskegee in the South, these white doctors recruited 600 black men. And they told them, these doctors told them that they would give them free medical care because these young men had various blood diseases. They called it blood illness. And that was a lie. What they wanted to do was, and what they actually did was, they gave these 600 men syphilis. They gave them venereal disease just to see what would happen. So it's not just the Nazis who are doing these sorts of things. This was people in the United States doing this to other citizens in the United States. And there's a very long history of this actually in the United States. And what many people do not know is that Hitler got some of his ideas about race from the United States, which is also really deeply disturbing. So, so what you find here is that there are these horrific crimes committed against other human beings in the name of science. And so why do people do that? Well, I think it's this issue of what you might call a perverse sense of curiosity. So up until about the 1700s, the Latin word is curiositas. Curiosity was seen as a sin, okay? And this wasn't just Christianity. This was also ancient writers that were, the Greek philosophers and the Roman rhetoricians. They all saw curiosity as an evil. And it was evil because it was people doing things just to see what would happen. So Augustine writes in his Confessions that he says, isn't it weird how, if people hear about there's a dead body somewhere, they will go out to see it just because they want to see it, because they have a kind of perverse desire. But sometimes this perverse desire goes too far. So we hear about people torturing animals or putting pets in microwaves and horrific things like this. And it's because there's a perverse sense of seeing what would happen. And again, this isn't science per se. This is scientists or people who do this. So the discipline itself doesn't actually do anything. But what we find behind all of this is that there are values that guide what we do, either directly or indirectly. So if I wanted to perform an experiment at the university, I'd have to go to the institutional review board and say, well, okay, what are you going to do? Are there going to be human subjects? And if there are, then I have to ask questions, or I have to answer some questions. Are you going to, are they going to be informed? Are you going to do anything that could harm them? And so on. So you can see there's a direct aspect here in terms of doing experiments, and there are limits on that. but also indirectly, there are values that guide us. So why would we do one experiment rather than another? And this isn't necessarily a moral value. It is it might be a value in terms of expediency or efficiency. And so scientists, in choosing to do one experiment rather than another, are exercising a value judgment. And that value judgment itself cannot come from science, because science doesn't make any value judgments. Only scientists can. So what all this shows you is that there are always value judgments that go beyond science. So science, so the old adage that science rules, the humanities drool, that doesn't work. In fact, it's really the inverse. It's really values rule, and science is going to follow whatever your values are. Okay, so this is why if a country has the value that we want to rule the world, they will. That's a value. It's not a good value, but it's a value, and so they develop technology to defeat the technology of their enemies. Okay, so science is not per se doing anything bad. It's just simply serving the purposes, a greater purpose than itself. So science makes no judgments about values. So this takes us all the way down to our friends E.O. Wilson and Wendell Berry. Who wins? Well, I say Berry does, or maybe Gould if you don't want to work too hard here. And let me explain that. So Wilson is really trying to put together this marvelous thing, but what he's doing is he's stepping outside of science. In fact, if you follow anything about Wilson, you'll realize that he's an entomologist. He studies ants, so he's the world's leading expert on ants. Now, that doesn't mean he knows how to think philosophically or theologically or use the humanities, even though he has a great respect for the humanities. But the thing is, why did he choose to become a scientist? Because he had a value that guided him, that he said, this is how I'm going to find meaning in life. And this is why Stephen Jay Gould is really valuable. Gould is usually writing against Richard Dawkins, and Dawkins is one of the readings in the additional readings folder. And he says, Dawkins is kind of like Wilson, but Dawkins is really kind of has a nasty attitude about things. I mean, Wilson is much more conversational, and but Dawkins is angry, and he says religion is all evil. All the world's problems are religion, which is just a stupid statement, because it isn't. It's you can say, yeah, religious people do lots of bad things, but so do people who are scientists. The Nazi war crime people and the people performing the experiments in Tuskegee, that was not religion telling them to do this. That was their curiosity, their perverse curiosity. So, so you get to Gould, and Gould says, look, it's pretty obvious that their science is telling you how things work, and religion and the humanities tell you why. It gives you meaning. And Gould says you have to have both of them. You can't simply choose one or the other, because that's impossible, because you're going to find meaning, and a scientist wouldn't be a scientist unless they found meaning in what they were doing. So Gould is saying, okay, let the scientists do science and let the religious people do religion. And so he quotes at one point Galileo, who's actually quoting someone else, a religious person named Cardinal Baronius. And you probably heard this. Science does, or the Bible does not tell us how the heavens go, but how one goes to heaven. And this is the basic division between, okay, the Bible is telling you how to be good and find a meaning in life, or religion if you want in general. And science is, and it's not really telling you anything at all about science. Science is going to tell you how the world goes and that kind of thing, okay? But then you get to Wendell Berry. And Wendell Berry is going to go beyond, he's going to go beyond Gould. And he's going to say, Gould's a little bit naive here, because these things do interact. In fact, our values interact, how we do certain kinds of things, which kinds of things, experiments we should perform, which kinds of ways of pursuing science and not. And science can inform us in other ways in terms of understanding really shedding greater light on what it means to be a human being, these sorts of things. So they really need each other. And so Barry's essay is on life as a miracle, in the sense that there is a kind of awe that is irreducible to any kind of scientific explanation per se. So that's the limit here of my little mini lecture here. And so let me just see if, okay, I'm gonna get the chat here going. Okay, now I see this from about 15 minutes ago. Thank you, Kimberly. So let me ask, do any of you have any questions about clarification on any of the readings, or any questions about this, or a comment that you want to make? Because there are also some other readings, and there's the Rachel Carson reading, which gets us into kind of environmentalism, which is really kind of a critique of science run amok without any kind of, or industrialization run amok. She was the author of Silent Spring, you probably know. Then there's a then there's that little essay from Richard Dawkins, Is Science a Religion? Well, yeah, for Dawkins. And then thirdly, there's the, probably the best reading is from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who is getting into Dawkins, and really just kind of playing with Dawkins or toying with Dawkins. So, okay. So Vicky has a question. Does Scientology factor into this at all? Let me respond to two things here. One is Scientology, and maybe you've heard of Christian Science. Scientology is really not science at all. It is a religion that uses the word science in it, and it is meant to, it's mostly about values. And part of this is because many of the beliefs of Scientology simply are not falsifiable. You can't say that they're true or they're false. They're just simply, they're not falsifiable. They're a truth claim. It's a claim. It's a religious or philosophical claim. If I say something like, I have a soul, that's not something that's not a scientific claim. What you can say is that I have a brain, right? In fact, we could do brain scans, and we could do these other things on my brain, but a brain is not necessarily a soul. So a soul is a religious or philosophical term. Okay, and then the other issue besides Scientology is something called Christian Science, and the only Christian Science college in the world is actually across the river from St. Louis U in Principia. It's called Principia College, and it's famous for its most famous graduate, I think, is it's not Robert De Niro, it's the other Robert Duvall. He's one of their graduates, and they have a view about life that most of the material world is not real. So the most real thing is spirit. So even the words, you really have to kind of unpack the words here. So okay. Question here, Tina, in Dawkins's piece, Is Science or Religion? If science needs evidence and religion is based on faith, how can science be a religion? Because he gives blind faith to religion, to a science. He is making a philosophical or faith commitment that science can answer all of our problems, and it can't. That's just a stupid thing for Dawkins to do. It's really kind of like Wilson in a similar way. So he has to have some kind of philosophical view, and actually most of his examples are in logic what we would call, it's a hasty induction. These are outliers. So if you have you have very large religions, and you have a very small group of people doing very bad things, why does he ignore all the very good things that good people are doing? So it's really kind of it's a naive approach. And his most famous book is called on this. It's called The God Delusion, and he's not even working with current data on religion. He's going back to the 1800s, and so he waffles on the word science. So he takes it in one sense to be empiricism, but he also, in terms of doing experiments, but then he also uses it in another sense where it is an explanation for everything that has significance. So And that's in logic called an equivocation, which is always a bad thing. So it's a fallacy, technically. So, all right. Other questions here on, have any of you read the, interview with Rabbi Sachs? Have any of you done that? Yes, no, anyone? It's well worth it. It's both very interesting as well as entertaining, I think. And it's not even like you're doing college schoolwork, okay? And it'd be, if you introduce that to your discussions, that might be a really helpful thing, because we can get talking about a few other things. Just, yeah, I mean, the falsification, essay is like, oh yeah, I can see how that works, right? And then you can see some of these other issues with science and religion. But Sachs is really kind of giving you a really thoughtful way of engaging it, and he's also coming at it. He's Jewish. He's not Catholic. He's not an agnostic, but he is a person of faith. But he's engaging in a very interesting way. So okay, all right. Okay, if no one has any further questions, what I will do is I will turn the little handout there into a PDF, and I'll upload it to the additional resources, and that's what I'll do with the recording. So I'm hoping this is helpful for you all in terms of working through the material, and maybe getting some other thank you, Tina, other perspectives on what's happening here and how to kind of navigate this, because I know kind of you can get kind of inundated, and then you're trying to sift through it, and you're trying to sort through it. So I tell you what, any questions that you might have afterwards, because I mean, sometimes like I'm in a meeting and it's like an hour later and I think, oh, why didn't I think of that? So feel free to either post something on if it's appropriate to a class, just include it in one of your posts. All right, and you can reference this. You can talk a little bit about the Ravensbrück or the Tuskegee experiments. Feel free to do that. Incorporate that into a discussion if you want, and or talking about this idea of curiosity, which I think is a very interesting issue. I think it's the way we use it now, though, of course, is this idea that it provokes us to want to know more, but sometimes there might be things that children might be very curious about things, but it might be harmful to them, because they don't have the capacity to process certain kinds of things. So it can be both helpful and harmful both. So all right, well, I will see you all online then. And for and like I said, if there's anything here that is helping you clarify some things, or that type of thing, just bring that into the discussion, and you can really kind of get credit for 2 posts, for just really kind of one activity. So, all right, by using the video for your, and then using that in your posts. All right, so I will see you all online, and hopefully next week. Okay, so be well and wear your masks. Okay, so bye-bye.